Okay, welcome, friends. My name is Narayan, and I'm here with Ananda Sangha Worldwide and Crystal Clarity Publishers. And it is a great joy and privilege to have Joseph Selbie, also known as Puru Shotama, also known as Puru, my friend, to be with us to have an informal conversation. You may not be able to see because of my virtual background, but I have one of his books, which is actually about the background here, the Yuga cycles, keys to understanding our hidden past, emerging energy age, and enlightened future. Welcome, Puru. So glad to
Well,
have
my
you.
pleasure. My pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to talk about the Yugas.
And Puru, I wanted to ask you, I've never had the opportunity to have a in-depth conversation with you like this, but I wanted to start actually by asking, how did you get interested and fascinated with the yugas to start with?
Well, believe it or not, I think I had some inkling of my interest in the Yugas as far back as the sixth grade.
Huh.
So in the sixth grade, there was a history period, where they were teaching us ancient history. And they were going back in time, and we were learning about the Middle Ages, and we were learning about the Romans, and we were learning about the Greeks, and I was really into it. And then that was it. And in sixth grade, I thought, that's it? There's got to be more. And I didn't voice it to anybody. I barely even gave it much attention myself. But there was this little recognition in my intuition that they were missing something. So fast forward to my college years, and the subjects that I was drawn to were kind of all over the map. I started out as a kind of a hard sciences major. I was trying to do microbiology, and in order to do those, you have to take calculus and chemistry and organic chemistry. And I realized, like a year and a half into it, that I just wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't really where I wanted to go. And I abruptly switched to Greek studies almost entirely because of a professor. Her name was Hazel Barnes. She's probably long gone by now, who taught at University of Colorado in Boulder. And she got me into that period of ancient history and understanding the philosophy and the archaeology. And then a few years later, I transferred to University of California at Berkeley and had switched to Indian studies, or South Asian studies as they called them. So I got into the philosophy and the history and the archaeology of India. And I was just interested. They fascinated me. And then about midway in my time at University of California, Berkeley, I read The Holy Science, which was
Wow.
Sri Yukteswar's book that is, for most part, a profound spiritual treatise about the nature of the soul and the nature of God and the nature or the process of self-realization. But there's this really short little introduction to that book in which Sri Yukteswar essentially is saying, the reason I'm about to teach you the things that are in this book about self-realization, about the soul, and the things you need to do to become self-realized, is because we've entered a higher age.
Hmm.
And then he explains what the ages are in the yugas and the fact that we've entered Dwapara Yuga, the energy age, which was appropriate to what he was teaching. So as a man of great wisdom, he was laying the groundwork for the rest of his book. But I just got really into even that little bit of an introduction to the Yugas. And it fit, obviously, all the things I'd been studying, not so much the science, although some of it, but certainly the ancient Greek history and archaeology, ancient Indian history and archaeology, and the philosophies of both. So I was just fascinated. I was like sold immediately because there were so many missing chapters of history in terms of the mainstream picture of what they call prehistory. But simultaneously, there were all these anomalous bits of information, more than bits, things like the Great Pyramid. You know, why was the Great Pyramid built in 3000 BC, roughly, so advanced, so vastly great, more advanced than anything that came after it until late in the Middle Ages? The Great Pyramid was the tallest building in the world for 5,000 years.
Incredible.
And it was only surpassed by the spire of some church built in Europe in the medieval period. So things like that and other things that we can go into more if you wish really stood out for me as being anomalies. And then when I read the Holy Science and the description, Yukteswar's description of the 24,000 year Yuga cycle, it all just fell into place.
What was it, Puru, about that Yuga cycle that kind of made it click for you? Was it the cyclical nature of it, or is it just an intuitive kind of knowing?
Well, I think the main thing initially was how it explained anomalous findings in the past, because there were no explanations for them in mainstream archaeology or prehistory. They just basically said that, in a sense, they downplayed things like the Great Pyramid. So the Great Pyramid really isn't as advanced as it seems because it was built by slaves.
Right.
And they used copper tools and they used woven ropes that were made out of hemp and, or not even hemp, but you know, the common kind of materials grown along the Nile. And so they downplayed it. They just said, you know, this was an extraordinary building, of course, but it just was a peculiar need on the part of the Egyptians to honor their pharaohs with these gigantic mausoleums, essentially. And that just didn't fit what was true of the Great Pyramid, and it didn't fit other instances of other anomalies. So it just blended those together. And then as I spent more time with it, I also became fascinated by what the Yugas imply for our future. Since for those who might be watching this who are unfamiliar with the Yugas, the Great Pyramid was built in a part of the Yuga cycle that was on the descent. So if you think of a clock face, the descending Yuga of Dwapara was about 4 o'clock or even 5 o'clock in between those. So now we are at 7 o'clock, and the minute hand, the hour hand, if you will, is going up instead of down like it was between 4 and 5 o'clock. So now we have this comparison. We can see things that were happening in a similar Yuga in the past and compare them to our Yuga today, and we can get insights into the future.
And one of those things that you talked about in a recent class was that in the descending age of energy, or Dwapara, it was the magic was prevalent and then it was lost, right? And you were expressing that now people are rediscovering magic or the use of the matter as a manifestation of divine energy. How can we?
Yes. So in that descending Dwapara era, historians, Western historians especially, and modern historians really, have referred to that entire period of from about 3100 BC to 700 BC as being the age of magic.
Hmm.
And they called it that because a lot of the treatises that come from that period, including things like the Egyptian papyri about medicine, papyri of traditional Chinese medicine, and also just books that would be considered completely magical from modern day eyes. They all included incantations, they all included people having inward focuses. It included the use of what we would call, magic wands, etc., various paraphernalia. But they all, if you look at them, not with the bias of 19th and 20th century and now 21st century Western view, take that bias away and you look at what they were telling people to do, essentially they were using life force. They were using subtle energy to lead their lives. And it was commonplace. There's a hieroglyphic panel in one of the temples in Egypt that has a kind of a line of description across the top, and then it has an image. And the image has a boatman rowing a boat, and he's in the back. In the middle, you have a person who's obviously a wealthy man by his Egyptian dress. You have another character in the front of the boat with their arms kind of up like this. Then you have out in front of the boat, you have cattle swimming in the Nile. And then right beneath them, you have a crocodile sitting on the bottom of the river. And if you translate the hieroglyphs, it basically tells you that the boatman was adding a little value add service to his normal ferrying service for this rich man to help him get his cattle across the Nile by adding a magician, or as we might think, just an adept with life force, to keep the crocodile pacified at the bottom of the river while the cattle swam over.
That is
so
true.
Magic was every day in Dwapara Yuga. And it wasn't hocus pocus. It was, people made use of it particularly for healing, but they made use of it for being successful, for business ventures, for positive outcomes of pregnancies for their wives and their children. It was all pervasive and it worked. So then, as you mentioned, as the descending Dwapara Yuga came to its close around 5 o'clock on the face of the clock, magic stopped working because the people in Dwapara Yuga lost touch, lost innate touch, natural touch with life force. They no longer felt it. They no longer could easily perceive it. And obviously, without being able to perceive it, they couldn't use it anymore. And the last gasps of descending Dwapara fell into very heavy use of dark magic and a lot of almost coercive
Hmm.
rituals with the gods of the time, and temples grew more prevalent, and more gods became were given temples and worshipped, and then even that no longer worked by the time we transitioned into the descending Kali Yuga. So now we're coming up into ascending Dwapara Yuga. We're going from 7 to 8 on the clock face. We're right at the beginning of that ascending period. But we are, as a civilization, rediscovering the use of life force. So we have various kinds of life force healing, from chiropractic to subtle essence type healing with homeopathy. We have hands-on healing. We have healers who just simply look into your aura and bring light and energy into your energy system and heal you that way. So we're rediscovering the techniques of using life force to live our lives, which in the intervening period from 700 BC, the end of descending Dwapara, to 1700 AD, the beginning of the new Dwapara Yuga, had pretty much just died out. And what was left was kind of a nasty take on magic. Witches were considered to be evil, and anybody who practiced these kind of things were suspect. And now it's starting to pick up again, and along with it is coming the most important uses of life force, which are meditation, pranayama techniques, and using our own life force to transform ourselves.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said in the descending Dwapara, it was the last gasp with that darker black type magic. I believe I remember Swami Kriyananda saying that in this ascending age, we're having the last gasp of Kali Yuga. Is that why there's this? There's so much chaos, world upheaval, social unrest. How much of that is simply we're trying to enter into a new age? How do you attribute? How do you make sense of that from the perspective of the yugas? What's happening with our world today?
Well, I think you're right. I think that what we're seeing is the slow end of what was more purely material thinking. So the age before our ascending Dwapara, Kali Yuga, is known for things being built in stone, or things that needed energy to function, either being human power, animal power, wind or water power, and the mechanisms to make use of those forms of energy were very mechanical, very, if you will, just sort of solid matter. No subtlety of uses of energy like electricity or the various forms of energy we know today. So that age also reflected that use of energy in the way people thought. So in Kali Yuga, essentially people were things. People were chattel. People were owned. Whoever happened to be the ruler in a particular area, who really had the power of life and death over everyone within their kingdom or within their area of control. And so most people, the majority of people, were serfs or slaves or indentured in some way. And that was the norm. So it made for a very controlled, fixed kind of thinking and a very controlled and fixed society. So fast forward now to where we are. We entered into a period of not only understanding subtler forms of energy like life force, we also discovered, in fact, like steam power, electricity, nuclear energy. And at the turn of the 20th century, with Einstein's 1905 paper on the special theory of relativity, we basically learned that there's not simply different kinds of energy that can influence matter. Matter itself is energy. There really is no matter. So now, as a civilization, we're living with the knowledge that everything is energy in varying forms. That energy can be released for beneficial purposes. It can be released for terrible purposes like atomic weapons, but it is there to be released. It has also given us some insights into how to manipulate matter on small scales with quantum physics that has led to basically the function of computer chips, and a lot of modern day communications and computer systems and the internet really rely on that more subtle awareness of how energy works and how it interacts with matter. So you've got this happening, and then you have the old Kali Yuga. And I think what the old Kali Yuga is still influencing us with are, in one way, national boundaries, the idea of the nation state, and the idea of being able to, control the people within your boundaries and to be in basically an antagonistic relationship with almost every other nation state, because you want to get what's right for you, and you really don't care that much whether these other nations benefit or not. So this is hanging on, I think, from the period that we just came out of Kali Yuga. How exactly it's going to morph, one of the things that we're seeing is there's a great deal of change in national boundaries. Things are, like the breakdown of the Soviet Union. First we had this block of nations and ethnic minorities all mushed together in one giant nation, and then it couldn't hold it together because there were too many diverse needs, and it broke up into a lot of smaller nation states, but not quite exactly the same as they were when they were taken into the Soviet Union. You saw after World War I, the Near East was carved up into Iraq and Iran and Palestine and et cetera. So there's been a lot of change. Africa is hardly recognizable today from what it was 200 years ago. So we are seeing it change, but we're still seeing the form of the nation state as the common form. So I can imagine a day, 100 years from now, maybe longer, 200 years from now, when national boundaries don't matter that much, that there's one set of laws, there's an enlightened self-interest about people having rights to live the way they want to live, that there's a relative degree of prosperity for all, because to have prosperity lacking over here, but prosperity present over here doesn't really work in the long run. That they're just going to be boundaries, kind of like the boundary between California and Nevada. It doesn't really matter that much to us, but it's a way of, you know, making governance efficient. So I think that might happen. And there might be some hard times between where we are now and that more enlightened future. But I think it's going that way. I think those are the last vestiges of Kali Yuga, which are, you know, organizational, geopolitical forms.
That those forms are, like you're sharing, seeming to be breaking down, you know, across every aspect of society. What about religious institutionalism? I grew up Roman Catholic. I could tell you, you know, stories of fights I got into my mother about getting confirmed at the age of 15 by the church. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, you know, that kind of churchianity, if you will, breaking down, and people finding an inner religion, you know, through meditation, as you were saying, and whatnot. That's a trend, obviously, of ascending Dwapara.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there, that we are also seeing that. And so as you started telling us about the Catholic Church often sort of gets picked on for the purposes of talking about this transition that's happening, but it gets picked on because it has such a long history of being an organization that you could see in its history through, you know, even just post-Roman times into the medieval period, that the church's doctrines more and more solidified around what was in the best interests of the church as an organization, and not in the best interests of the people who believed in that religion, or in many cases had no choice but to believe in that religion, or at least to be governed by that religion. And so you saw things like priestly intervention in whether you are going to go to heaven or not. So this was a way to make people want to be Catholics, and they wanted people to be Catholics because then they would tithe to the church, and the lands the church could buy would increase, etc. I mean, the church was the single most powerful political unit in Europe for 400 or 500 years in what we think of as the Middle Ages. It didn't wield direct temporal power, but almost. And it did so by making its religion more of a, you know, a source of power than for bringing people to God. So now, again, fast forward to our time, and we see that the Catholic Church, as well as other organized Orthodox churches, are struggling to keep people interested. And the dogmas that they created that worked effectively in the Middle Ages are now really sort of working against them. You know, I've heard lots of people tell me a story of being Catholic, or, you know, pick a religion, and being in a family that, you know, a warm, loving family that took care of each other and watched out for each other and went to church on a regular basis. And as children, they were, you know, they were caught up in I think the best side of organized religion today, which is that it gives people a wholesome, positive focus in which to serve, or in which to come together, you know, youth groups, etc. But the story that I'm told over and over is that by the time people got to the point where they could really think about what the teachings of their particular church were saying, it no longer added up. It might have been because it didn't work with science. It might have been that it just simply didn't make any sense anymore. It might have been the exclusivity, the notion that, you know, this church and this church only that serves, you know, let's say it's, again, the Catholic Church, and there's 500 million Catholics around the world. I don't know if that's the right number, but that those 500 Catholics, and only those 500 Catholics, are going to go to heaven, and it's just going to leave out the other 6.5 billion people that are on the planet. But these, you know, these tenets, these dogmas just didn't add up for a lot of people in their adulthood, their young adulthood. And so they started looking around, and either they left religion altogether and just became, if not atheists, they didn't become actively spiritual in any way. But an increasing number started to seek out spirituality that is experiential. So instead of having to rely on a church for your being saved, and that's about all you could expect to get from your church, is just that you would be saved and go to heaven, they instead turned to experiential spirituality, where you could have positive, beneficial upliftment in the here and now. You didn't have to wait for your death and hopefully going to heaven, but you could meditate. You could practice yoga postures or Tai Chi or Pilates or pranayama, and you could feel the benefits. You could feel the results of that. And because of that, experiential rather than sort of commandment-driven approach to religion, the only area of religion that's growing now is what is known as spiritual but not religious.
I was just going to ask you that, because I remember you said that the other night. It's almost like 1/3 of Americans now consider themselves spiritual,
That's a huge number.
right?
It's a huge number. Something like 40 million adults.
Yeah.
And the other more orthodox approaches are, you know, Catholic Church is shrinking in America at best. Some of the Christian, more sort of forward-thinking Christian denominations have started to make the appeal of a lifestyle more positive. And they have these mega churches, and you go to the mega church,
right,
and they have movie theaters, they have swimming pools, they have clubs for kids, they have simultaneously with services and classes for adults. So it becomes this entire lifestyle. And you can see how that would appeal, because you have an immediate benefit. You feel better by being in that environment all the time. But I think that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. I think that more and more we are going to see experience-based spiritual organizations will grow. And there'll be a lot of people who don't affiliate directly with any organization. They affiliate, if you want to say it that way, with their own higher self and their own ability to you know, advance their knowledge and understanding in a real way, in self-realization of what God is and their own soul.
I think that's why I was so drawn to Paramhansa Yogananda. You have the beautiful picture of him there in the background, and that phrase, that I believe he coined it. It's a universal phrase, but he brought it to popular, in sort of the popular paradigm, if you will, self-realization. Uh, isn't that such a balance of self-effort and drawing on divine grace? Do you, I guess my question is, do you feel this is a really hopeful trend? I mean, because you hear a lot in the mainstream that people don't believe in God, there's more atheists, right? The churches are going away. But what you're sharing from this Dwapara Yuga perspective is there's actually this sort of trend towards people are becoming cultural creatives. They're finding that experience of God within themselves and then trying to, find ways to outwardly express it creatively. I mean,
Yeah.
does that make you feel hopeful about the future? Because there's so much, you can get sucked into all the discouragement and bad news right now.
Yeah, and we have, unlike the descending ages of the Yugas, where the civilizations are slowly losing awareness and plunging into periods where people are less able to live the way they had been living in their past. We now can look forward. We become more able to
Mm.
live as we go forward. We can expect our understanding. We can expect even fundamentally what we can perceive to expand. We talked earlier about life force. That's again, the core of spiritual but not religious. It's the core of experiential spirituality, is that you can feel it. You can feel energy moving in your body, and you can be healed by other people, and you can heal people
Mm-hmm.
with life force. So I think we have, a lot to look forward to. Now it's a long period of time. I've been throwing out some of these dates, but we are in the first 300 years of a age that is 2,400 years long.
Right.
So on one level, you can say, well, we ain't seen nothing yet, but it's going to be a wonderful age. But most of us, at least in this current guise, are not going to see it. So future generations are going to see a better and better world. But we've come at a time, I very much think, people like yourself, myself, probably everyone who is listening to this, we've come to transition
Mm-hmm.
Dwapara Yuga from those remaining centuries of materialist, inflexible thinking into true Dwapara fluidity and into a greater appreciation of the inherent human rights that we all have to live lives as we can manage to live them, and that we can use our God-given powers to further that process, our concentration, our willpower, and the control that society exercised for so many millennia over people, I think is gradually going to break and go away.
Mm. So it's like what do they call it in physics? A phase change. We're going through that.
Quantum leap, yes.
Yeah. From the ice cube to the glass of water that you have there.
Yes.
I mean, we even see that. I was thinking of things like you've got Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, a financial system that's broken, and now people starting ways to actually take that power back as well. Do you see? I mean, Dwapara Yuga trends like this happening in the financial world and politics in every aspect of life.
Yeah, I think that what we do see you mentioned Bitcoin as an example, but I think the most um, significant and hugely influential example of Dwapara advancement from an outward perspective rather than the inward perspective that we've been discussing more is the internet. The internet has absolutely transformed the world in less than 30 years. So I will think back occasionally to what I would have had to do prior to 30 years ago to make certain things happen, like writing my book or getting a computer system set up that is the right one, or making purchases of things, of communicating to like-minded people. It was even just prior to 30 years ago, it was difficult to reach your people. It was difficult to reach those who had like-minded thoughts and interests to you. Now it's everywhere.
Right.
You know, you can have the most obscure sounding hobby in the world, and you can find 1,000 avid enthusiasts in that hobby through the internet. You can talk to them, you can learn from them, you can enjoy them, you can share stuff with them. It has just transformed the way people can live their lives. And now with the pandemic, we are seeing even greater reliance, sudden jump of reliance on the internet with such things as what we're doing right now. Even 6 months ago, we would have saved this process until we could be face to face, because the technology wasn't even as good as it is now 6 months ago. And people wouldn't have been as receptive to the results of this. Now people think, oh, cool, a recorded Zoom talk. I'll go check it out. So I think this, in a way, what the internet has done is that it has given us as close as we're going to get to mental telepathy for 2,000 years. In the next age after Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, which is not even the highest age, there's yet another age beyond it, Satya Yuga. But in Treta Yuga, Sri Yukteswar said, mankind as a whole would communicate using mental telepathy. And one of the things about mental telepathy that is so changing, if suddenly everyone on the earth had mental telepathy today, is that it's just as easy to commune with the thoughts of somebody on the other side of the earth as it is in the next room. So essentially, the internet is the Dwapara Yuga version of mental telepathy. It allows us to communicate freely with people all over the world in as close to instantaneousness as you can get.
And that's one of the hallmarks, right, that you talk about in the book of Dwapara Yuga also, that it's destroying the boundaries of space as well, so that we can commune with people around the world. And do you see the way people obviously can use technology for good means or for bad means, but people have found your book on the yugas through the internet, and they have found solace. I remember I think it was a woman said it helped her make so much sense. So she here could, find your book, read it, have a clarity of understanding that could give her a greater perspective. I mean, it seems like this is only going to grow exponentially.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, the good news is that everybody who is into, antique musical instruments from the turn of the 20th century, they're going to be able to find just about everybody else on earth who's interested in that. It also means that if you want to meditate with people who, because you have nobody in your immediate neighborhood who meditate using the same techniques as you, if you want to meditate with somebody, you can now meditate with somebody who's, they're leading a meditation in their evening and you're meditating in your morning.
Yeah.
So that is tremendous. I think there is a kind of a darker shadow to this ability that I am perceiving more and more. And it speaks to the fact that Dwapara Yuga is really not that enlightened. We have the Treta age coming up, we have the Satya Yuga coming up. Our age is still just out of the material age into the energy age. We have the mental age to go and the spiritual age beyond that. So we have the internet manifesting an aspect of Dwapara Yuga, whether descending or ascending, which is that it's an age of self-interest, that people tend still today to be motivated by what's in it for them. Now, they can be nice people and they can be positive people, giving people, but then you also have people who are, only that on the surface, and underneath, they're really driven very deeply by what's in it for them. And one of the manifestations of this sort of dark shadow I'm getting to, is, I think, and I've not heard anybody say this, but I think it's true, is that the internet is enabling conspiracy theories.
Sure.
And I think conspiracy theories are a way for people to only communicate with and only interact with and only believe people who share their fairly limited, fairly dark views of what's going on in the world. And because, let's say 50 years ago, if I was really into some conspiracy theory, like, JFK was actually assassinated by a cabal of people from the CIA, the only way I really could have learned more about that was to read books and maybe get some articles and magazines. And now, I can go to 25 different websites that are crammed with information,
right,
purportedly backing up whatever that conspiracy theory is. And I can chat with people via Zoom and I can email them. And it generates this kind of conviction among those who are into that particular conspiracy theory that is making facts no longer meaningful. Everybody has their own facts now.
Right.
It used to be, when Walter Cronkite was everybody's dad, that everybody agreed on the facts, but they disagreed on what the facts meant. They disagreed on what the facts should indicate that we should do to move forward in politics or anything. Now we don't even have any facts that are shared. Republicans have their facts, the Democrats have their facts,
right.
Conspiracy theorist people have their facts. And it's making for I don't know, I think we're going to see kind of a toxic result from the ability of the internet to so confirm and intensify varying kinds of convictions. And it's going to affect politics, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect culture. So I'm a little worried about that, as you can tell. But I think that's the nature of um, our ascending to our Para Yuga is that it's going to have amazing tools. It's going to have amazing abilities. We're going to have nuclear energy, but we're also going to have nuclear waste. You know, we're going to have nuclear energy, but we're going to have nuclear bombs. That it's a two-edged sword.
Right.
The abilities and knowledge that we have can be used in a number of different ways. And some of them, I think, are going to fight hard.
How do you help people avoid that trap? It's kind of like a confirmation bias trap that you're talking about. And you have like, you know, the echo chamber of the internet. You believe in something, you just type it and boom, you know, you've got your validation for whatever that belief, whether it's true or not. What is, you know, what do you do personally that helps you remain centered and calm, yeah, and joyful amidst, you know, this chaotic period?
Well, I think fundamentally I do what you do, and what um, anybody who meditates seriously to try to find God is, I try to see it all as it's all God's play, it's all God's movie, and I'm in this particular episode of the movie, and I have a responsibility to leave the world a better place than when I arrived. Sort of like, I forget the exact phrase, but it's, you know, when you go backpacking, they urge you to, you know, bring back more than you took in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, pick up trash,
Right.
make, you know, steadily improve the wilderness, not just, you know, take care of your own garbage and stuff that you created. So I sort of feel like we all should do whatever we can to make the world better. And what that's going to be is going to vary from person to person to person. And that's great as long as we're all trying. And meanwhile, there's going to be a lot of other people who are not making the world a better place. And that's just the episode we're in. We just are going to have that to live with. I don't think it's easy, too easy perhaps, to get caught up in thinking that we have to and we can solve everything that is bad in the world. We should try to solve whatever we can solve. So I don't mean to say don't think it's useless, but if you get your, you know, you get your heart set on you've got to make the world a better place, or else you're going to feel bad, that is a very dangerous place to take yourself, because I don't think we're going to see tremendous strides forward in the world in our lifetime. Even the newest generation coming up is not necessarily going to see huge change. And if you're banking on it, you know, that is really a requirement to make you happy, then you're going to end up being cynical, bitter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have conversations with people like this, I'm sure, where if you say anything about politics, you know, their responses are, just a bunch of crooks, they're just a bunch of self-interested assholes. You know, the bitterness that's coming out is because they invested too much in the hope that it would all get better, that we'd have peace on earth, that we'd have heaven on earth. And you can't go there. You can find peace within yourself and heaven within yourself. And you should try to. You should do everything you can to feel God in your heart and mind and body, which is what meditation is the, you know, key practice for.
That was really profound to me when you were sharing along these lines when we had that Road Ahead series class that the real Yuga cycle, there's the inner Yuga cycle.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, about the evolution that really, maybe that's the essential way to pick up the Yuga cycles. It's to remind us that we need to go through that inner evolution of our own consciousness. Have you experienced that in your life, and do you feel that awakening trend for others, if they could look at the yugas that way?
Yeah. I think in a way, what the yugas do is they mirror personal human development, and what from the beginning of ascending Kali Yuga to the end of ascending Satya Yuga is 12,000 years. And it goes from this material age of Kali to Dwapara's more fluid energy age, to Treta's more mental age, and finally into Satya Yuga, where the residents, the citizens of Satya Yuga, are by and large aware of God behind all of material creation. They can feel and know that. So that progression of 12,000 years through the yugas is something that we can do in a single lifetime if we choose to try to do that. I have had this happen a few times, so it's sort of a funny anecdote. A lot of people will say, well, will I incarnate in Treta Yuga next and then in Satya Yuga? Hoping, thinking, wanting to just sort of get a free ride on the yugas. But from the way I understand it, if you believe in reincarnation at all, when you reincarnate next, you're going to reincarnate where you need to go. So you might go to another planet even that's in the yuga you need to go. And that only when you're ready to be in an environment where everybody knows that God exists and are communing with God and are themselves nearly realized people, only when you have done the work to get yourself to that level of realization are you likely to incarnate in such a time. But meanwhile, it's a good ladder to think of. So most of us, when we're born, begin dealing with the physical world. We have to learn how to make our bodies work. We need to learn how to talk, to walk, to go to the bathroom, to eat. It's a really, really physical time. And it's really not until, we get into our early teens and even early adulthood that we begin to appreciate energy and learning to focus our will to draw energy to accomplish things. And that learning to use willpower is sort of our own personal ascending Dwapara Yuga. Taking that knowledge within in our own personal ascending Dwapara Yuga is learning to focus your life force at the point between the eyebrows, learning to draw your life force up the spine into the brain, learning to ultimately go beyond awareness of the body by leaving the physical world altogether through the point between the eyebrows. This is what our own personal ascending Dwapara Yuga is about, is learning to control our life force. Pranayama means life force control. We don't have to learn the lessons of each age perfectly before we can start dealing with the lessons of the next age. So Treta Yuga, the inner lessons we learn there is control of the mind, concentration. So when we are able to gather our inner forces of life force and bring them up into the brain, that is a blissful, energizing, positive experience. But our mind could still be all over the map. It's very easy to wander, to have your mind, you realize after a minute or two or maybe longer in your meditation that you just went somewhere. You were totally gone. You were thinking about some movie you saw or whatever, and suddenly you kind of wake up and go, oh right, I'm meditating. Okay, let me focus again. So that ability to hold our attention at the point between the eyebrows takes considerable practice and skill. And when we do it, we become more concentrated as a person. We become more aware of our higher superconscious nature, and we're able to apply that superconscious awareness to tasks that we're doing. We become more creative. We become efficient. We become more successful as an individual because we are practicing control over our mind, and it's our mind that really directs us more than anything else in our day-to-day. But then there's another level, excuse me. Just as we can bring our energy up to the point between the eyebrows and still be scattered, we can bring our attention to the point between the eyebrows and be focused, but still not focus on God. We can focus on many things using that focus. And one of the temptations is to focus on success, to focus on, planning what it is we need to do. And I think this is a hallmark of really successful people. You read about people like Steve Jobs and what's the guy who's Virgin Atlantic?
Yeah.
Name is eluding me.
Branson.
There's a lot of stories about very, very successful businessmen or successful scientists who can get to that point of one-pointed focus, but then what they focus on is more of a worldly and outward, whatever they're into. It could be artists, it could be politicians, it could be anything. And so you don't necessarily take that opportunity and dive into God. So then your final ascending yuga that mirrors your own inner process is Satya Yuga. So when you graduate from Treta Yuga, you go into an age when you're really dedicated to using all of your abilities, all of your focus, all of your heart, body, and mind to seek God. And that is a matter of many things, but I think most it's a matter of one-pointed, determined focus on getting beyond streams of thought that take you away and into just one-pointed awareness of God. And in there is devotion, that you have to get your heart into that to help you keep that kind of powerful focus on God. And then you can have your own era of Satya Yuga, where you are living in this world, but your awareness is really centered in God. You see many pictures of saints. I think of Lahiri Mahashaya especially, who, in his picture, he's kind of
Hmm.
peering out at the world because his inner world, which is probably full of light
Hmm.
and infinite, and he could be seeing galaxies, he could be seeing astral regions, he could be seeing the supernal realms, and yet at the same time, he's able to participate through the senses with his body in this world. So that's the high states of the saints and the avatars, is that they can be in that high state of Satya Yuga consciousness, of God consciousness, and still be participating in the world.
That's beautiful, Puru. And that there, and I guess is why they say one moment in the presence of a saint can be your raft over the ocean of delusion, because when we see, I keep looking at that beautiful picture of Yogananda behind you, and you see a picture of a saint like that. I think it reminds you, a friend of mine is a singer down here in LA. She's been part of the LA Opera, and she loves that song, "Oh Holy Night." And she was talking about how that line, when he appeared, the soul felt its worth. And that's kind of what you reminded me of, expressing that Satya Yuga consciousness, that the great ones, I think when we see them, they remind us of our own potential greatness. And I want to thank you, because this whole conversation has been so uplifting in that regard. Is there any question you wish I had asked you today? Any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, it's actually, I was enjoying talking about sort of current issues of Dwapara Yuga. And of course, I'm most interested, because it's my heart and my life is in the spiritual side of what the yugas can teach us. Most of the time, what I end up talking about is the past, because people are fascinated by, what happened in Treta Yuga, and what
Right.
about the Vedas and the Great Pyramid, and did they have electricity and descending Dwapara and things like that, which I do enjoy talking about. But this has been a very pleasant and moving opportunity to talk about the yugas in a different way. So I appreciate it.
Ah, it was my joy, Puru. Well, we'll do it again. This will be the first installment. We could talk more about the ascending Dwapara Yuga trends and the phase changes that you're talking about, with meditation and the practices like Kriya Yoga, which will help us make these kind of breakthroughs, so we're not feeling like we're bound by the current chaos, but that we're able to live in God. Thank you so much,
I look
Puru.
forward to it. God bless.
Thank you, Puru. God bless.